Hello everyone, welcome to this Carcanet event. It's a pleasure to welcome you here. Thank you for joining us to launch the Feeling Sonnets by Eugene Ostashevsky. I'm Jasmine, I'm from Carcanet, and I'm just going to run over the order of events this evening before I hand over and we get started. So first things first, please do find the chat box for us. Say hello, let us know where you're watching from, let us know what you think of the reading throughout the event. Tonight we'll be together for about an hour. That will consist of Eugene reading from the book for us. While he's reading, I'm going to put the text up on screen as a visual guide for you, but you are in control of your own screen. So if you want to see his face bigger and the text smaller, you should be able to either drag the box or double click on his face to switch them over, but have a play around and you should be able to reconfigure it to suit you. If you have any problems like technical issues, put them in the chat and I'll try my best to help you during the event. After Eugene's reading, he will be in conversation about the book, and there will also be some time for audience questions towards the end. So as well as finding the chat and saying hello to us in there, please find another button which says Q&A, and if you get your questions for Eugene lined up in there, then he'll be able to answer them later on in the event. So I'm very, very happy that tonight Eugene is joined by Rachael Allen. You may know Rachael, she's the poetry editor at Granta. She's also a poet herself, and her collection Kingdom Land came out with Faber in 2019, so you should definitely go and check out her work if you don't know it. She was also involved in Carcanet Press, which I'm sure she'll tell you about, was an early iteration of the Feeling Sonnets published by Carcanet in recent years. So I'm very, very happy that Eugene will be in conversation with Rachael this evening, and I'll ask her to join me on screen now so that we can get going. Thanks.
Hi. Thank you, Jazz. And thank you to Carcanet for having myself and Eugene this evening, but mainly Eugene. I found the very early iteration of the incredibly special The Feeling Sonnets by Eugene that Carcanet published, I think, back in 2012. And I've been in love with these poems since that time. And when we first read them on submission, they're absolutely extraordinary pieces. And I'm so happy that the larger cycle of sonnets has found its perfect, brilliant home with Carcanet. I'll briefly introduce Eugene with a more traditional bio and then talk very briefly about the book, both my responses to it and the wonderful words that Carcanet have given us on the book. So Eugene Ostashevsky is a Russian-born American poet and translator. He was born in Leningrad, grew up in Brooklyn, and is now based in Berlin and New York. His last full book of poetry, The Pirate Who Does Not Know the Value of Pi, was translated into German and won the 2019 International Poetry Prize at the City of Münster. Ostashevsky teaches at the Liberal Studies program at NYU. He has also served as the Siegfried Unseld Visiting Professor at Humboldt University, the Dorothea Schlegel Writer-in-Residence at Free University, and as a DAAD Berliner Künstler Program Fellow. It's really special to speak to Eugene over Zoom, because when we launched our pamphlet for the Feeling Sonnets, we did a Skype reading at a gallery, and it felt like a very early iteration of video platform poetry events. So it feels like something's come full circle, or in another 7 years, there'll just be another platform that I'm talking to Eugene on. And I remember during that reading as well, Eugene got a phone call from his daughter or something, and it was like a wonderful sort of emotional and intimate indication of the ways that we were to communicate to come. To talk a little bit more about the Feeling Sonnets, I find the book ludic, deeply felt, engaged with the emotionally productive signifiers that language can deliver to us, and engaged with studying these processes also. It's such a moving book in its ability to dissect a word, a sentence, a relationship, to show and prove the associative logics of these words and sentences and relationships, as Eugene does. It's a testimony to his expansive, poetic, and generous landscape of feeling. And I feel like what this book does is create not only a landscape of language dissection and language experimentation and language exploration, but an exploration of feeling and feeling through language. A little bit more on the book from Gwyneth Lewis, who wrote, Eugene Ostashevsky is a multilingual language explorer The Feeling Sonnets are an exhilarating and witty inquiry into the designs that language has on us as intellectual, domestic, and historical beings. This is poetry as punning philosophy, both entertaining and deeply serious. This book is a tour de force, turning languages, spotlights onto speech itself. I won't talk too much about the book anymore because I'd like to hand over to Eugene to read his incredible work, and also we'll talk more about it in our conversation. So just to say thank you again to Jazz and Carcanet for having us, and I'll hand over to Eugene now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rachel, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you very much to the press and to Michael and to its staff for publishing this beautiful book, which as soon as it made it through the post-Brexit German customs, I looked at it, I was like, this is, I should have called this book the cherry bomb, because that's what it looks like. I'm going to read 9 sonnets. This is number 17, and it plays with the many meanings of the word, well, the sound associations with the word daughter, but the word here is taughter. Daughter, taughter. Okay, 17. This is my taughter. This is my other taughter. They play a dress and redress. They're princesses. They wear prints. They wear prints out. Out of what? Out of line. Out to what? Out to tatters. They, hey, do they speak? They speak as speak. They speak as speak of minds and takes. They speak as speak of eeks and keeps. They speak as speak of rates and tears. They speak as speak, I speak of not speaking. Hey, my totters across the room. My other totters across the room. My 2 totter across the room. They take a stance. They take a stance by happenstance. Totter, I'm taught to you. I'm that other. Totter, I'm taught to you. I'm that other. I'm that other to my totters. Taught in Russian is that, the one over there. Okay, 22. I don't think 22 needs an explanation. Berlin is green. It is made up of old growth and new growth. A fire took place here, a conflagration. It's called conflagration because it started with flags. A flag is a mark. If there's a mark, there's a market. I come from the market, make dinner, and engage in struggle. It is a struggle to get my daughters to sleep. They sleep on bunk beds. The bunk beds are contemporary. They come from IKEA. They were transported by trucks. My daughters are transported. There is a herd of unicorns on the rug below them. They come from developing markets. In markets that are already developed, philosophers say that unicorns do not exist. There's only one step from the remarkable to the marketable, and the unicorns have taken it. So say the people of developing markets, but the philosophers do not hear them. A marketing campaign at the airport says the city is done with walls. A ring of barbed wire around the airport ensures safety. Next, 29 is the beginning of kind of a sub-cycle called Die Schreibblockade. Schreibblockade means writer's block in German, but literally it means write blockade. And it's a cycle of poems about the blockade of Leningrad. I always had difficulty writing about, it was always impossible for me to write about what I think of as my history in English. And one day I was doing a reading in Petersburg, and just in the hotel room, I started writing this, and it opens with a translation of, or an altered translation of a line from Mandelstam in a poem about Leningrad. 29. I have returned to the city of my dead. It is the living who live there. I do not know them. The palaces have been restored and painted in pastels. The language has been enriched with new words, such as gastropub and restopub. I got lost on the way from the hotel to the poetry reading. I read poems in my acquired language, the international language of commerce, science, and now the arts. To facilitate understanding, they were projected on the screen, one line at a time. They were afforded the attention they would not have been accorded in their home country. It took place near a palace where my grandmother had helped at a propaganda front to facilitate international understanding. It is now a museum of Fabergé eggs. I did not attend my grandmother's funeral because I was too far from a visa granting facility. I did not attend my aunt's funeral because I was too far from a visa granting facility. The street names have been restored to their historical forms. The park has been restored to its historical 18th century shape. Representations of me reading were posted on social media. I received many new friend requests. And 33 is from the same sequence, Die Schreibblockade, kind of nursery rhyme, and the lead character is Peter the Great, the founder of Petersburg. Peter, eater, bit a platter, bit a table, bit a bit off, bit a pit out, spat a stone, ate the door, empty emperor. You first, famine before rule, cannons sound, cannons swound. He strides peremptory as a storm cloud. He bought artifacts, fetuses pickled in formaldehyde on impulse. And still it wasn't enough. Ate the angel, ate the steeple, ate the gentry, ate the people, ate his infant son Alexis, which means wordless. Why would you even name your son that? He forgot the name he was going to name. He ate and ate and ate until he was 9, and then he evacuated. Yet if not for his pack of papers, we would all be lisping in English now. A ruler is a thing of measurement. He induces the ferule with a ferule. A ferule is a metal ruler. 35 starts with 2 Russian words. Again, it's Die Schreibblockade. The first word means stone, камень. And the second word is каменя, which in English is камена. It's the Latin name of the muses. What else is in here? The gardens of Leto. Leto is the mother of Apollo and Artemis, but the pun here is on the Russian word for summer. It's the summer gardens. What else? There's some German here. There's a line from a Paul Celan poem. Ich sah meine Pappe. Okay, everything else is obvious. Камень, каменя. A swan engages in self-reflection. The gardens of Leto do not commemorate Niobe. Riven, the vernal ice drifts on the Never River. Ava, my daughter, has a fever. Her face looks thinner. She ate bread and butter, my daughter. She wants me to lie next to her so that she may grab onto the sides of my head and drift off to sleep. Fata, water. She wakes up, goes to pee-pee. I hold her over the bowl. I try to wrap her in a bathrobe. No, I'm schwitzing. I do not need it. I'm not cold. I'm wet. She sneezes, a poppel hanging out of her nose. Der Poppel, but die Poppel. Ich sah meine Poppel, and so on. She reads asterisks and is delighted when I tell her that Ave is Ava spelled backwards. Papa, says Ava, holding a brownish apple. Schmeiß es weg. I schmeiß it weg. We live in Berlin. 39, obviously based on a sonnet, on a holy sonnet by Donne. But Cantor is Georg Cantor, the founder of set theory, who was actually born in Petersburg and lived there until he was 11, and then he moved to Germany. Repeating city, column after column. The pedestal rhymes with a base. Cradle of Cantor. Cradle of Cantor. The pedestal rhymes with a base. Column after column. Repeating city. Repeating, arise, arise. From death, arise, from risible death. You numberless infinities, where is your witticism? Arise and speak in ribbons with punchlines. Behold, I suffered death by banana. What's a banana? Death by swamp water, and death by the bellowing brown river pacifies pacification. Death by fire, and especially death by friendly fire. Death by state security services, because the state is always feeling insecurity that it's not providing enough services. Death by rationing, irrational death, when those with less food die so that those with more food may enjoy more food. Death by enemy. Have you seen the enemy? No one has seen the enemy. Death by Goethe and Kant and Schiller. Death by the Erlkönig. Death by German Romanticism. A hydroptic death. Death of the translators of Dante. A one-eyed death. Death of the translators of Homer. Death by dearth. That is to say, famine. A familiar and familial death. Death of practically everybody. Death by camping. Oh, you numberless infinities, grown delicate with the satiaties of night soil, pull yourselves together, Osiris. Is the granite keeping you down? Be not undone. Rise up and be counted. Is the granite keeping you down? Rise up and return to the ranks. Trade dejection for bijection. Take a number and also a name. Is the pomegranate keeping you down? Trizzini, Rossi, Rastrelli, Quarenghi, our Harlequin come from Bergamo, Montferrand, Cantor, 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 a contour in letterboard, the contour of letterboard, count, uncountable. The Italian names are the architects that built the city in the 18th century. 40, again from the same cycle. The cycle as a whole is dedicated to Polina Barskova, whose book Living Pictures has recently come out in the UK, which is also about the blockade. She's a scholar of the blockade, and we work together on translation projects that kind of brought about my writing about this. So 40 is a mashup of a couple of lines from Mandelstam with lines from a song by Vera Lynn from a World War II song, which some of you certainly know, which is called We'll Meet Again. Shall we come together in the city will meet again like lips in the syllables of its name. Have we taken something under there? Our sun. Let's pronounce the sound of a word, or maybe denounce a byword. Is it a silly word? Is it also a wound? Is it tightly wound? Is it unsightly? Is it a word sung by the souls of women? We'll meet again is a song. It emerges from their mouths like a sword. It slices open the night. Is it sung gainfully? Is it sung soundly? Is it heard? Is it a password? It passes. It passes controls. It passes controls unheard. We'll meet again in a song. We'll meet again some sunny day when the blue skies drive the clouds far away. We'll meet again is a song. Is it a sung song? Is it a sun song? You will not note the sun because we have buried the sun in sound, that we have soundly in a shroud. Is he unhurt? Is he unheard in a shroud of sound, of snow, the sound of snow? Now we have buried him. Now we have buried him. And 46 is from a different cycle. It's the title poem of a cycle called 14 Ways of Looking at the Translator. Inspired loosely by Wallace Stevens' 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird and Elliot Weinberger's 19 Ways of Looking at Wang Wei. In fact, I wrote this poem. I started this poem I wrote this poem in Shanghai, but I started it outside the subway waiting for Liza Bushinova, who's a Russian Chinese translator. And so I started writing this poem in my head. If a poet stands outside the subway entrance long enough, a translator is bound to emerge. The poet was rising from the subway by escalator. Was there a translator behind the poet? The poet and the translator are one. The publisher omitted the source text. Stationary, the poet transferred from one train of thought to another. The translator ran for the shuttle, weaving among the people and also unweaving. The translator lies in a trance. Does the poet possess the translator? Does the translator possess the poet? The apparition of these men and women in the subway, is there no publisher among them? The poet took the ABC at West 4th. The translator took the 123 at Borough Hall. One searched for a subway station called Ithaca and found 3 subways in Ithaca, while the other proceeded to Utica Avenue in search of integrity. The poet and the translator were riding the escalator, which was scaly like Gerion's back. They weighed each other with scales. The poet found the translator wanting. The translator found the poet wanting. To be more specific, the poet found the translator wanting the publisher, while the translator found the poet wanting the publisher. If a poet stands outside the subway entrance long enough, the translator is bound to emerge from another entrance or exit. The poet was rising to the surface and already saw natural light at the entrance, which is also the exit. The translator stood one step below on the escalator, holding the publisher's hand. The poet turned around on the escalator. The translator said, "I'm going home." There's no correspondence between the words of our languages. Okay, and the last poem I'm going to read is dedicated to my daughter Una, who is sitting right here but can't hear me because she's wearing headphones and drawing, because this room is the coolest room in the house. Okay, number 52. You are turning into Daphne, who's turning into a laurel, except you're turning into a woman. Look, your hands are branching. Daphne turned into a laurel with her father's help. Your metamorphosis is more independent. I'm writing this poem in Brooklyn. I'm under the sun and near the water. You are falling asleep under the green moon of Berlin. Buildings rise above you on both sides of the Schöneberg-Wilmersdorf border, those that had been seared by bombing and those that sprouted afterwards. You're turning as you walk by the side of the river Spree. You're turning as you bicycle to school and from school. You're even turning as you fight with your little sister, except you're turning in reverse then, at least mentally. Poets and philosophers have concluded that the river Spree cannot turn back again. Their ground was that its waters don't taste like tears. May you be nobody's laurel. Thank you. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eugene.
Thank you very much for listening.
I just felt so taken in by the kind of language play and nesting of words and etymological experimentations and sound sense and emotional narrative that you employ in those poems and in the book as a whole. It's just totally all-encompassing. Amazing to hear them read out loud. It's so special. Thank you for that. I have a few questions here, but before I start interrogating you, if anybody would like to ask a question while we're talking, there's a Q&A box, as Jazz mentioned, in the bottom of the Zoom, and also a chat, which I'll try and keep an eye on. And in the last maybe 15 minutes, we'll take questions from the audience. So do please put any comments or questions in there and we can feed them to Eugene. So the first thing I think that I was so taken with in the book is a more kind of linguistic, kind of structural obsession or preoccupation that you seem to have with wordplay and puns and this kind of aural and oral associative logic that I feel like dominates in the feeling sonnets, exemplified early on in the book by how the word feeling itself moves through the early parts of the text. The word feeling almost seems to grasp at ideas and echoes and ripples and connotations of itself. It feels like it's networking almost through the language, or kind of meandering through different kind of meanings and semantics. A line that I particularly love and have always loved in these poems, which exemplifies this kind of play, is the outlines of our feelings lie without the amens of our names, with that kind of gorgeous internal play on amens and names, the finality that amen kind of indicates, and that idea of naming as an initial sort of a beginning of something, if something's being named. And I also think about one of my favorite passages, which I'm just going to recite to you now because I love it so much. We are trying to make sense of a feeling. Making sense of a feeling is like building a boat from water. Feeling is a field, it is uneven. None of its points is like any other. A field of what? A field of being a field. A field of what? A field of being a field. Or feeling is field work, for it involves another. And it's just this gorgeous kind of sound sense where you manage to create a kind of logic that reaches a direct kind of meaning or representational meaning, but still feeds back to this hugely moving impetus for the book as a whole, which feels to me so much about fatherhood and familial love breaching kind of geographic boundaries and borders and linguistic boundaries and borders as well. And I wonder if you could maybe talk about the kind of processes behind writing the sonnets. With Clinic, we published a section of them, and I've been interested in how they've changed since that point when we published them, 7 years ago, whether you've been writing them from that point and how many you had before then, and I guess what the entirety of the project kind of means to you at this point.
Well, okay, so as far as the history of the project is concerned, so when I was working on my last book, the Pirate Who Doesn't Know the Value of Pi, the ending of it is very much anti-poetry, because the two protagonists are, they're engaged in this banter on a deserted island, and it just ends with their deserted island, and nothing that they say can take them off the deserted island. So when I finished that book, I just thought, okay, so now I'm going to write some actual poetry. And then, I've always worked with puns, and some of this has to do, I think, with my weird linguistic background, and that I learned English early, but it's still not my first language. I learned it in my early teens. But then I also lived for many, many years in places that aren't English speaking as an adult. So in the biographical sense, I look at the language from the side and it seems bizarre to me. And this word is like this word, but why are they like each other, right? What's the semantic relationship? But then from the point of view of like thinking about, I don't know, poetics and thinking about literature, in some ways, this kind of punning has to do with it's not really bringing in the experience of the Russian avant-garde. It's kind of a reflection on the formalist reflection on the experience of the Russian avant-garde, where ultimately in the work of Russian formalist critics, poetry is about displacing the meanings of words that we use normally, right? And you place words next to one another so that they, deform each other's meanings, and so that their meanings entangle. And that might be something that actually has led my process, or it might be something that allows me to justify my process. I'm not sure. But in some ways, these poems they're about feeling, in the sense that they're about being lost, and they're about not being able to make sense of, the world where you are, and, you see it feelingly, right? Like Gloucester and Lear. So I don't know if I answered how much of your question I answered, but basically.
Yeah.
And as far as the cycle changing, the technique's changing, and it's, thank God, that's what I want. I think it's terrible to write the same kind of poem over and over and over again, right? So, this, this is why ultimately I broke it down into 4 cycles, and they kind of push in different directions.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how the work has developed, and also just the kind of different voices that I feel that you move through, and the kind of different sort of systems of poetics, and the kind of different ground that you cover. It just feels so world building, the whole book. Yeah.
Thanks. I want to say that what's like not amazing is that, I mean, especially the section Die Schreibblockade, which is very important to me, is that rereading it now in the context of the Ukrainian war, it's just too close, right? I mean, so it feels very like I don't think I could write it now, right? Because I wouldn't be thinking. I mean, I'd be thinking about Mariupol or something. Does that make sense? So the poems change even after being written.
Yeah, context is this shifting thing, I suppose, that changes how they're read always. Yeah, I think, I mean, something you mentioned earlier, just about how the book sort of sees things feelingly, and that there's a kind of banter within the language, feels like the kind of perfect way to sort of see the quite joyous and, as I said, ludic way that you move through actually incredibly stark and difficult ideas around sort of bureaucracy and borders and passport control and language difference. And I think that something really sort of politically illuminating about the work is how you move between different languages and how these languages sit alongside each other in a way that feels quite seamless and necessary and engages with all the formal techniques that we were talking about earlier, which is a kind of entangling of meaning and a kind of entangling of process. There's a quote that I think about in the book that I also love. My body is multilingual. It sticks out its tongues, but they say the same thing. And it made me think about how you're engaging with these really interesting lyric traditions. You know, you've got this idea of a kind of emotional address, but within one poem, you know, within one sentence, we have English and Russian and German. And it would be interesting to know about your kind of thoughts about sort of translation politics within the book and this sort of involvement of other languages and how you straddle, I suppose, different kind of cultural languages and verbal languages, and how they were kind of embedded for you in the text.
Well, so just now I went swimming, like, I don't know, 2 hours ago, and my mom was visiting. And so we went swimming in a lake in Germany, in Mecklenburg, right? And, everybody's screaming at each other. Me and my mom are talking Russian, I'm talking in English with the kids are speaking in German to each other. So in a way, this kind of mixture for me is, this is kind of my everyday language, if that makes sense. This is just the kind of mixture that surrounds me. Even before I came to Germany, when I was growing up in the Russian immigrant community in New York, we code switched all the time. And, when Russians who were not immigrants would hear us, they were like, this is not the right way to speak, but this is the way we speak. So now, as far as translation is concerned, I think the experience of code switching actually has real major ramifications for translation, which is that when you code switch, you say things in this language as opposed to that language, because of audience, but it has there's a semantic dimension to it. So in a way, code switching is a very anti-translational practice, right? Because if you, I don't know, even if you take a literary text where the characters code switch, you translate it into one language, and all the kind of nuance, that social play, which is ultimately very meaningful, is gone. So, and the way that that relates to kind of normal poetry, even poetry in one language, kind of normal monolingual poetry, and especially classical poetry, so poetry in meter and rhyme, you know, Keats, or Shakespeare, is that poetry is the only kind of genre of language which is very, very Worfian, very obviously Worfian, right? You can't just take a Shakespeare sonnet and bring it into French, you know, without this incredible loss, semantic loss, right? Which you can't make up for, right? And this is the way in which it differs from business documents, from, right? So there's a bridge in this sense between translingualism, you know, between speaking multiple languages without translating them into one another, and kind of the classical poetic tradition, right? In that in both language choice is a large part of the meaning, right? And the unique material aspects of this language as opposed to that language, right, in poetry, of course, are very much in play. So
I love
a couple of sentences were very professorial, but
yeah.
You know what I mean.
And I think talking about the material aspects of the poems is something that feels really key to these sequences and the book as a whole. And when I think about the really sort of idiosyncratic wordplay and sound play and sound sense that you engage in, I think about how words feel like they're kind of nesting inside each other a lot in the book. And there's this kind of fantastic play with rhyme and meter, actually, and kind of rhythmic patterns that I heard most when you were reading them out loud. Like, you can pick up on them when you're reading them in the book, but it's fantastic to sort of hear them, to actually sort of sense them through sound. And, you know, I wish I was not monolingual so that I could pick up a little bit more on how you're playing with that in the different languages that you employ in the book, which is, you know, German, Russian, Italian. You know, it's like it's a really kind of expansive network that you're calling on. And I was also interested in this idea around etymology and this kind of nesting of words within other words, this kind of sonorous digging that I feel like you do. You kind of leap from these gorgeous springboards of a kind of story or a narrative, and then you almost sort of disassociate the reader from the emotional impact that that story may have on us by conducting this kind of really magisterial word and language play. And I'm really interested in etymology. I'm really interested in how poets kind of consider an etymological research mode. And obviously that will link quite a lot to your work in translation and you speaking other languages. I don't know, maybe that's something you could talk about a little bit as well.
Sure. I mean, there are two kinds of etymology. There's, you know, when you look things up in the OED and you do stuff with the history of the word, or you move the word around so that various meanings of it become active. But then there's what used to be called popular etymology or folk etymology or pseudo etymology, which is basically if you put words next to one another, close to one another, that sound alike, they will seem related. Even feel and fool, right? if you say the fool feels, it has a kind of compelling quality to it. You're like, of course the fool feels, right? It becomes one becomes associated with another, right? This is something that it's a kind of like etymological entanglement, which is not etymological at all. It's based on randomness, right? It's pure randomness, and these are the patterns that are obviously unique to each language.
Yeah, it feels like a kind of associate, like it feels like etymology by proximity.
Right.
It also, yeah, it feels like it's breaching that even, but it's such a interesting way to think about how we create our own roots through language and create our own roots through the book. And it feels actually just like another metaphorical device or something. It's like these two words in proximity are going to indicate this to me. There's a poet I love called Sylvia Legree who does this quite a lot in her poetry. I don't know if you've read her, but she sort of really, she creates these kind of almost wind chime poems where the associative logic is it's what leads the poems, it's what directs the poems. And I feel that a lot in your work as well, with this kind of perhaps more fleshed out narrative surrounds. I mean, your daughters, just to finish up with my questioning as well, are such like incredible figures in the book. They're the kind of emotional thread that these games and this play kind of spins around, and it must have been such a wonderful and perhaps, you know, emotionally taxing experience to kind of write them into the book this way. Perhaps it feels like a real testimony to being a dad.
Yeah, I don't think that was intentional. I think I just started writing about it. I mean, it's so I mean, I spent a lot of time with them, and then I also spent a lot of time being away from them. And then I listen to the way that they speak and the way that they learn language. And I mean, especially this kind of weird combination of English and German, where both of them at a certain age, and this must be a feature of bilingualism, but especially Ava the younger, around the age of 3 something, it went on for months, and it's in the Carmen poem that I read, where she would use with verbs the German root embedded in kind of an English structure. So like, I'm suchen it, I'm looking for it, right? From suchen, right? Or I mean, even schmeiß this weg, right? Throw this away. And it's super interesting to hear that. It's super interesting. I mean, first of all, it's like you're listening to a 3.5-year-old and you're like, wait a second. So you understand what a verb is. And then you understand the difference between the root and the prefix. And you're taking one from one language and doing, you know, and the other from the other language. And you do this without thinking regularly. That's like a normal feature of the way that you speak. That's really bizarre.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's really
since both of them did it. I mean, it's not, you know, it's obvious, like a normal feature.
Yeah.
And then it's also interesting to listen, like the way that they learn numbers and the way that they learn very basic mathematical concepts is also really age deliberate, like age related. Like you can't, there's a certain age in which very early where counting actually does involve memorization, right? You can't explain that this is +1 and then the next one is +1, or at least I can't explain it. I tried it with both of them. And then there comes a moment when that's possible. And that's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And very poetic. It just has to do with, you know,
That's I was going to ask a little bit about maths in the book, because I feel like there's some numerical stuff that's probably going over my head a little bit, but maybe not. But also there's a question in the chat that kind of relates to form and numbers a little bit, from Marjorie Perloff, who said, I love these new poems, but why are they called sonnets? Is anything that has 14 lines a sonnet?
They have the logical form of a sonnet.
Mm.
I mean, in that they're not just 14, but that they're 4, 4, 3, 3. So, and also because this kind of punning is actually quite associated with the sonnet tradition in particular.
Mm.
So from Petrarca to Shakespeare to in French, there's this minor French Huguenot poet Jean de Sponde from the Wars of Religion, who does the same thing.
Mm.
I don't know if all 14 line poems are sonnets. I don't think so. But I wrote these as sonnets.
Yeah. Is there anything else numerical going on in there?
Is there anything else numerical in there? The big numerical thing is in the poem, the counter poem that I read, because which is not just a pun on counter and count, but it has to do on the different kinds of infinity, the countable infinity of natural numbers and the uncountable infinity of basically the countable infinity of rational numbers and the uncountable of the irrational numbers. There's a few math things here and there.
Yeah, I love this bit. To tell is to order. What orders what number or feeling? Why does this matter? I want the feeling to be my feeling. I don't want it playing a number on me. Numbers are the music of talking. To number is to take. And it's just, it's so self-reflexive. Like, it feels like it's commenting on the way that you're structuring the book as a whole. I feel like at every point you're kind of tying up and untying the book. You're sort of showing us what you're doing, and then you're kind of taking it all apart again in this really self-reflexive way.
But and I mean, as you just reminded us, I mean, numbers also means verses, right? It's a way of saying poetry, in a very old-fashioned way, but it's useful here.
Yeah. There's a question from Polly Booth, who there's more questions about sonnets, but there's also a question from Polly Booth saying, do you have any key literary poetic influences? Which I'm also interested in, actually, because you've got such an idiosyncratic mode, and probably have read widely into other kinds of literature that maybe we might not have been as privy to.
It's very, I mean, that's a really hard question, because I mean, because I'm old, and because the influences they happened a long time ago. But I've always I mean, poetry of the avant-garde. I mean, I've been working professionally on basically the year 1913, 1914 for over a decade now. But I also, way before, I did a huge amount of work on early modern stuff. It sounds stupid, but probably with punning, probably Shakespeare. I've done a lot of thinking about puns in Shakespeare, not sonnets, but plays. I mean, sonnets also, but probably that kind of combination. So poetry of or writing of the decades around the year 1600, and writing in the couple of decades around the beginning of World War One. Those are the kind of key moments.
Yeah. Somebody else has asked, who are the formative poets for you also amongst Russian writers. And when did you first start writing, or when did you realize you're a poet? And this will probably have to be our last question, actually, because we're edging close.
I mean, so with the Russian writers, it's really the avant-garde. The people that I've translated were the main ones were the underground poets of the 1930s, like Vidensky and Harms and Zabolotsky. But also the futurists were technically very interesting. Mandelstam above all. Yeah. And as far as when, I mean, I don't know when I started writing a long time ago, in high school, I guess, maybe even before.
Nice. Yeah, I remember a talk that Matvey Yankelevich did a while back on, it was like Soviet Union poets and saliva. I can't remember the like actual specifics of the topic, but there was a poet in there I loved, Dmitry Prigov. He was yeah, somebody who I really love reading. So playful, so funny, so subversive. Yeah, he's someone who I really liked. But yeah, I feel like if there's no other questions that I can see, it might be our time to wrap it up, Jazz.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Eugene, and thank you so much, Rachel. It's been an absolute pleasure this evening. It was amazing to hear those poems read. So yeah, I can't thank you enough, and thanks, Rachel, for hosting and your pertinent questions. And thank you guys. You're absolutely great. It was great to see your messages in the chat and your brilliant questions. I'm going to put the link and the discount code in the chat for you now. Go and buy the book, please. You've got a while to use that code. It'll come as an email tomorrow for you as well. So like, you've got time, you don't need to do it right away. And again, if you have problems, just get in touch with us and we can help you get a copy of the book, many copies of the book, should you wish. Okay, last point from me. Please join us again next time. The next launch is on August. I've forgotten the date and I haven't written it down. There's a link there and it'll tell you when it is. Sorry, let me look. It's on August the 10th. We're launching G. Leon Co's new collection, Inspector. He'll be joined by Gerald Yam. So please sign up and sign up for our newsletter and keep in touch with us. So congratulations, Eugene, and thank you guys again. I'll leave the chat open for a couple of minutes. You can get your last minute messages in there, but I'm going to close us all off now. So thank you and bye-bye.